Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world, tuning into this edition of Countercurrents Radio Live. My name is Pox Populi, and once again, I am sitting in for Dr. Greg Johnson. And we are streaming live on Odyssey. Welcome to all of you who are listening over on Odyssey. And we are also on D Live. So you can tune in on either of those platforms this evening. And as always, we will take questions and comments from both platforms, Odyssey or DLive, as well as you can send comments or questions via super chat donation on Entropy. And I will put the link to the Entropy website here on the screen. And for those of you who are just listening, it's entropystream.live/countercurrents. And with me tonight is a very special guest. He needs no introduction. It's Morgoth.
Hello again. Nice to be back on Countercurrents Radio again.
Yeah, thank you for taking time out this Saturday to join me. So we're going to talk about quite a few themes this evening, but I wanted to start off by asking you, how's the garden going?
It's okay. It's a sort of I've got like an arrangement. Me and my brother I did a video about it. There was a lot of hard work involved, but we've ended up with a couple of raised beds, and I've kind of taken a leadership role on it. I'm a better gardener than I am a fisherman, but that's not saying much. I've made a lot of mistakes. I've made a lot of mistakes, but I have actually like grown veg, which I've eaten. So that's nice, but yeah, I could, like, all the mistakes I've made just make you want to cry. But that's what it's all about. You learn by them. I mean, the drama that I've got today is that my peas, I didn't actually know what they were. I planted a couple of rows of peas. I didn't know what I was doing, and then I sort of figured it out that they were growing all of these twines. And I was like, I'm going to need some kind of trellis. So then I built my old trellis, which was useless and rubbish. Well, at first I bought a few bamboo canes and they just grew like widely out of that. And now I'm at the stage where they grew above the trellis. I kept like sort of adding on the trellis because I couldn't. It was too late. I couldn't actually undo it because they're so entwined with it all. And I kept sort of ad hoc hammering bits and pieces onto me, so they had something to cling to, and they just kept getting higher and higher. And now today, I've got the pods. I've got the peas. It's growing peas. I'm getting a harvest, but a strong gust of wind, and it all collapsed in on itself. It's just a big mess. So I'm hoping to get as many peas off it. And then what I've done is ordered another planter, and this time I've like that will just be the trellis bed, and that's like where I am. But there's such a difference. There's such a difference when you actually the peas just taste so sweet. So I don't know like if the plant's going to survive for another few weeks because it's in quite a bad way. But there's a ton of pea pods growing on it. But so next time I'm going to be prepared where no matter how high they get, there's going to be a sturdy, decent trellis for them to grow up. That's kind of the story of the day as far as the garden concerned.
Yeah, and it may seem like small talk about the garden, but actually it's quite relevant to the themes of tonight because you wrote a very moving Substack article about this new venture into gardening and how it relates to the great turning away, as you've called it. And I think we'll talk about it some more as we carry on the conversation. But I also liked it because I was a bit of a gardener many, many years ago, so far back in my life that it might as well be a past life. But I really enjoyed having. There was a moment in my life where I had a bit of land to myself. I could use it the way I wanted, and I turned it into sort of fruit and vegetable garden. But I absolutely loved it, and it wasn't that difficult for me. I didn't have that many trials or tribulations. The most difficult for me, well, I suppose not even the most difficult, just the most labor intensive was actually digging the garden, because I did it all organic, natural, nothing chemical, nothing toxic. Um, but the soil was terrible. It was full of like alkaline and hard rock, and I think there was even concrete, and this, it was a mess. So I did this thing where you dig like 12 feet, and then you turn up all of that soil that's underneath about like 12 feet deep, and you bring that up, and you make that the sort of the topsoil, and then I added in some organic mushroom compost, and I planted basically just tomatoes and carrots and onions and basil, or as you would say, basil, I suppose. and and what else did I add? I think I added in some cabbages, some shallots, um, and it worked really well. I did my own sort of insect repellent using a spray bottle with cayenne pepper, and then I took hair from my pet dog at that time and just interspersed it into the garden and along the edges of the garden to sort of see if the smell of a dog would keep little critters away, and it kind of did. Um, and then I added a little fence around it with chicken wire, and that's that. I didn't have too many problems. And like you said about the peas tasting so sweet, the tomatoes that I grew, I got lots of heirloom varieties, really rare ones. Like I've never seen these before. Some of them were all these vibrant yellow and striped colors. One of them had a sort of fuzzy exterior, almost like a peach. And then I got some cherry varieties that were also just bright orange and yellow and reds, and they were so sweet. They were almost like little candies, and people would come over and would just eat them as if they were sweets, just one after the other. Yum, 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 yum. And I have never experienced anything that comes close to the taste of these tomatoes that I was growing. They were so good. Um,
Yeah, I think that's a thing as well that I've noticed is the actual taste of the veg tastes different from what I'm used to from a supermarket. I remember I mentioned this a while ago somewhere on social media or something, but when I was a boy and I was growing up, a Granny Smith apple was so sour. It was actually a bit of a struggle to eat it. Like all your cheeks would be sucked in, and it was a kind of challenge. And a golden delicious would be like really sweet and
mhm,
juicy. And a while ago, I bought a pack of apples, and I got Granny Smith as well. And when I began to eat it, it was just a sort of generic apple.
mhm,
And I thought I didn't realize it at first. And I looked at the label and I went, there's something. And I remembered, and I was like, I remember when a Granny Smith apple was like really sour. It was really struggled to eat. And then I ended up buying all like different kinds of apples, and they were all just the same. It was
yeah.
they had different names, but it was all just a generic apple.
When I was getting
Um,
into gardening, I bought and read two books. One of them was on tomatoes, the history of tomatoes, the varieties of tomatoes, and the cultivation of them, and also how they become sort of like a black market, or like a sort of almost like a sector of labor entirely done by exploited workers in like places like the United States. And I also bought and read a book on apples, and there used to be hundreds and hundreds of varieties of apples, but because of supermarkets and convenience and just sort of the generic um, homogeneity, the global homo, right? Global
yeah,
homogenization. Now there's really only a bog standard five, let's say, varieties of apples, and they all taste the same. And I've also noticed that when I mean, everyone will know that a supermarket tomato or a supermarket apple, whatever, it doesn't have the same flavor as something fresh from your own garden or orchard. But also, what I noticed is that when I take a supermarket apple and I take a few bites out of it, or I cut it in half and I leave that other half out, it doesn't go brown. It doesn't. It lasts almost a full 24 hours, and there's no browning. There's no And I look at it, I ponder this half of the apple in my hand, thinking, this isn't. I remember when apples used to go brown. What's going on here?
Yeah, I mean, another thing about the veg that I've been growing was it became like a running joke because I had lettuce, which was nice and crisp, but there's not much eating in it really. I mean, one of the things that I will grow for bulk going ahead. So one of the things that I've got now is a bit of I've got like a row of spinach, and I know that like it's useless because that you don't really get much from spinach. Like it's hardly worth the space that it's taking up from what you'll get from it. Unless you had like a whole bed of it, and it was kind of similar with the lettuce, but it wasn't the same with the cabbage. It was a sort of Portuguese cabbage that I planted, and I had two rows of them, and there was just so much to eat. It was unbelievable. I was just giving it away. Um,
Hmm.
and it got to the point where like Lady Morgoth was, she how the question was put to her like, "What do you want to have with your cabbage tonight?" It was just, like, we can have some sausages or we can have a bit of pork or like basically what do you want to have with the cabbage tonight? But in the end I've like frozen loads of it and all of that kind of thing. But yeah, I'm you learn these things as you go along. But I think it's nice to have a couple of things as a kind of a little side thing. But I'm definitely growing for bulk in the future.
Yeah. Well, it's amazing how with just a little bit of care and getting just the basic things right, the nutrients of the soil, the nutrients for the plants, it's incredible how much of a yield you can get. And without, I mean, if it's just your own personal, little garden, it's not too labor intensive. You can still get quite a lot of reward. Um, of course, depending on your area of the world, your climate, the critters around that could, you know, get into your garden and take half the things that you're growing, all of those variables aside. Um, anyway, so this thing about the garden, you wrote a very good Substack about it, and it kind of ties into the themes that we're going to talk about tonight, which are some themes that you've also addressed in work that you did over the past month: the competency crisis, the absolute state of British police, and the age of immigration. Now, I really wanted to invite you on specifically to talk about this age of immigration because you also wrote a very good Substack on this. And I was really moved by it because it spoke to me. It spoke about things that have been on my mind for many years now. And I myself have voiced similar concerns that you did in your article. But before we get into what you wrote about and what is the age of migration, um, let's just set up the stage. Um, a few weeks back, William Hague wrote an article, an op-ed, and I believe it was the Telegraph, titled "The Age of Immigration," and basically he in this article, which I believe was even titled, if it might have been subtitled, "Why even right wingers admit we need immigration." I believe that was the subtitle. And in this op-ed, he basically makes it seem like an accomplished fact. It's inevitable. 140 million people are going to migrate from the global south into Europe, and there's nothing we can do about it. And so we might as well find a way to make it work. And so we need to do things like follow the US example, the US model, focus on the positives, like line on the graph goes up with regards to the GDP. Or also, we need to address potential challenges such as identity issues. So we need to forge these new identities, which will, of course, be very superficial and hollow. And I think that this op ed got the attention of a lot of us in nationalist circles, in dissident circles. And so then you wrote an article about it. And I've asked you if you could read your opening paragraph. So if you don't mind, would you do that for us?
Yeah, okay. I'll just scroll up a little bit because I was looking for the headline there. Yeah, so at the start of the article, The Plague of Higgs, and this is me on Substack. And I say, it's difficult not to give yourself over entirely to despair and despondency in these times. I wasn't planning to write about immigration. I have another more culturally orientated article I was working on. The problem, though, is that the nuances of a movie or book evaporate as soon as you come into contact with an article such as the one written by Tory luminary William Hague yesterday in the Times. As a content creator, I try to keep abreast and up to date with what my peers are writing about, particularly here on Substack. There's a degree of incentive to have the novelty take and niche, to wander into the digital wilderness and stick a flag in the virgin territory and claim an issue. Transgenders, technocracy, the internet itself, Agenda 2030, or political philosophy. The post liberal scene of disgruntled Gen Xers and millennials on Substack are aware of the problems associated with mass immigration, but the issue has the whiff of the plebeian and low status about it. Nevertheless, the flow of foreigners into our living space continues unabated day in, day out.
Yeah. When I read that, I just knew that this article of yours was going to be very profound. I knew that it already moved me once I read that opening paragraph, because it speaks to something that I addressed even years ago about how there's this tendency now on the dissident right, whatever you want to call it, the Anglosphere, the online community, where because the immigration issue has been going on for such a long time, and because there doesn't seem to be any improvement from our perspective, because it, like you said, it seems lowbrow almost as our movement becomes more intellectual, delving into issues of philosophy and things like that. This immigration issue seems too lowbrow. It's too normie even, and so people have branched off, as you said, to these niche territories. And a few years ago, I described it as sort of like when hipster fans of an indie music band decide that they no longer like that band because it's gone mainstream, it's become popular. Their favorite indie band's music now appears in adverts for Ford Fiestas or something. So they turn on that band and even pretend like they've never liked it to begin with. And I find this troubling, especially when it comes to the issue of immigration, because it's not stopping. The boats keep coming, and depending on which European country you're from, it's quite bad. So I'm half Italian. I'm very concerned about what happens in Italy, and the situation under the far right Giorgia Meloni actually has got worse. There's been record-breaking numbers of arrivals since she's been in office as the premier of Italy. Just the other day, a Nigerian who's in Italy illegally, no business being there, raped and murdered a 61-year-old Italian grandmother. And these things keep happening. And I understand why people would decide, you know what, I don't even want to bother with this anymore. I'm going to look for some new, more interesting, more inspiring, more stimulating territory, because I've said all that can be said on this issue. Nothing is improving. There's nothing that seems that we can do. And I understand that, because in my case, I'll just go without making content. I just will say, look, it's all been done and it's all been said and done. I don't want to repeat myself. And it's a very demoralizing matter. So better to just not say anything at all. But at the same time, every other theme, every other matter is either indirectly or directly caused by this immigration, this great replacement problem, whether it's the competency crisis or the thuggish police, or the fact that now we have people wanting to seek solace in a vegetable garden because the world has just got so messed up. And so I just thought that was a brilliant opening paragraph to a very brilliant article. Would you
It's
like to expound a bit on it more?
Yeah, there's because I read a lot of Substack. I think it's a good format. I think it's good. I like to see it coming back. I think that it's generated something of a flowering of new blogging and new there's it's kind of created new people who are adjacent to us, and they're popular. They're getting invited onto various sort of think tanks in conservative circles, and they do have a kind of reactionary. They're mainly Gen Xers and millennials. There's one of them. One of the ones I was thinking about when I was going into that was Mary Harrington, because I know that she's got a big following. But there's a lot of them. There's a lot of them on Substack, and I enjoy the content. I'm not having a go. I enjoy the content. I enjoy the writing, and they will talk about, say, the transhuman stuff and like where are we with feminism and the sort of the rise of the digital age, like chips and a lot of things related to this. Like there was a one article where women who died and young women who died in car crashes were going to end up where their bodies would be allowed to be bought by transsexuals or something, so they could kind of be kept alive in a coma in order to give birth. So there's a lot of sick, twisted stuff out there that I can fully understand that people are writing about. But it interested me that there's obviously, like, yeah, okay, that is horrific, and it does say about where we are going as a civilization. But it's also like there's this kind of tidal wave coming towards us just purely on demographics. I mean, I know, like, I'm in a minority position because I actually like Game of Thrones and everybody else hates it and how it ended. But it's like when you got people coming down from the north, the watchers on the wall, they were going south, and you had all of these sort of petty. You had all of the different lords squabbling and backstabbing each other, and all of the gossip and the drama and all of this going on. And those people from the north kept going south, and they were saying, you have to understand what's going on north of the wall. You have to go like you have to understand the threat that the White Walkers are posing to us. And they're like, oh yeah, it's a bit, we don't believe in all of these fairy tales, and we'll send up a couple of soldiers to help you out. Just kind of bog off and leave us alone. We're not going there. And it's like you have to understand that this is really serious. This is an older problem. I understand that it isn't flashy, and it isn't high status, and you probably will not get as invited to as many swanky conservative shindigs and podcasts. But like
Hmm.
this is a tidal wave. Like this is the what. And when you then look to the William Hague article, because another thing that these people will talk about is like democratic accountability, in regards to some of the more technocratic things. So something like Agenda 2030, for example, it would be something that they'll spend a lot of time on. I'm like, yeah, I get it, and you like to get in on the science, look, I've done it as well. I am fascinated by that stuff. Um, but at the end of the day, that is the demographic issue. It can't be kind of unshackled from that. And I mean, there was a second part of the next paragraph I can actually read, because it touches on this exact thing. Um, a few years ago, when I began to pay more attention to the Schwabian Great Reset issue and the associated vaccination programs and climate policies, I reasoned that while the emerging future of transhumanism, digital surveillance, and AI automation may be a horror show, it might at least wind down the Great Replacement. The so called Great Reset would crush our spirits and literally, and as a matter of policy, negate our humanity. But it would also be a world of Kubrickian sterility and utilitarian order, not the chaotic favela and ethnically driven war zone of a dwindling white population desperately seeking sanctuary in their own lands. Alas, it would appear that we're going to get both, however paradoxical and incoherent that might seem. Artificial intelligence and automation will make millions unemployable, but at the same time, we need an endless flow of labor from the third world. As a nation, we need to reduce our carbon footprint and consumption levels, but we also need more consumers and bodies engaged in production. And it's like, if you're so there's two sides to that there. There's the purely kind of technocratic transhuman thing which people are interested in. Again, fair enough. But the problem is that you've got the other side of the equation, and they seem mutually incompatible on many levels, but it's both of it is still happening. We're seeing the highest rates of immigration ever, and this does actually have a knock-on effect. So the kind of people who will talk about the Great Reset or 15-minute cities or whatnot, you will own nothing and you will be happy. A lot of them will be kind of a lot of those people will view mass immigration as being like a more low status kind of thing. But here's the rub. I mean, one of the things that's going on is that these corporations are buying up all of the property, and they're giving it over. They're kind of in the public-private partnership. This is just on housing, of
Mhm.
course. That there's many issues, but just on housing, what we see are public-private partnerships. Or what the WEF go on and on about. The private part of that is getting money off the public part of that to pay exorbitant amounts of rent, and in the UK, the council tax and any damages to property, in order just to house migrants. So this has the kind of the knock-on effect where the native people just can't buy property anymore.
Mhm.
They just can't do it. So here so where that's going to go is where they then say, we need to have property as well, and then it will be that they are actually they will actually they will have to go cap in hand to these corporations, to the public-private partnership, in order to get housing themselves, because what they would normally have just been to have an agreement with a landlord, or even, God forbid, buy their own property, that will no longer be there. And so this is a way that you see the mass immigration. It actually does slot in with a wider agenda, which is more fashionable to talk about. I remember during the COVID, pandemic thing, I was accused of this. I was accused of saying kind of, be focusing too much on all of this. And if actual fact, that was a bit overplayed if you look at the content I was doing at the time. But it was certainly a couple of years on, we can see that the two are not mutually exclusive at all.
Absolutely not. And I would say that even certainly around 2020, 2021, there was a lot of back and forth about even some of the COVID situation being deemed low status or lowbrow or schizotard tier stuff. And so, you know, people were saying that we shouldn't care about, vaccine conspiracies or Klaus Schwab. He's basically just like a James Bond villain. And yet all of those things were really important, and they were damaging, and they were harming millions of people, these policies and these medications. And so what I observed was people, let me first say what I observed, and I'll also play devil's advocate for them. What I observed was people were going off into, as you put it, like staking claim, planting a flag in ever more niche territory, new terrain. So it would be like deep dives on some obscure philosopher from, the 17th century or something, or film reviews and things like that. Now, in an age of censorship, when we are very much censored and punished for speaking out against the Great Replacement, or in the case of 2020 and onward, some of the COVID policies. I understand that, especially people with a large following who attract the eye of Sauron, they have to be a bit more careful. And so they can't always be addressing these matters. So occasionally, in order to make stuff and keep the eyeballs on their channels, they have to do some other things. So it could be a deep dive into some philosopher or economics or something like that, or it could be a film review. And then film reviews and book reviews and things like that are good for culture, producing cultural content. So I understand all of that, but at the same time, I was very put off with the association of issues like immigration or the WEF and Klaus Schwab and vaccines and all that with lowbrow conspiratard tier uh, matters. I was a bit troubled by that because like I said, I just think that the immigration issue, it's not going anywhere. I understand it's frustrating. I understand that it's demoralizing, but it doesn't just slot in with the other issues. I genuinely believe that it is the progenitor of some of these other issues. Like you also did a video, and I believe you also wrote a Substack article about the competency crisis. Now, I don't see how anyone could deny that the demographic disfigurement of our countries, first world countries, via the replacement of our population with third world peoples who haven't created or ever maintained a first world society, I don't see how those are separate at all. And you mentioned that when in the competency crisis, that basically, we can already see and we can imagine increasing that airplanes are just going to be dropping out of the sky. And I'll be honest, I'm not looking forward to the day that I might have to fly back to the United States, for example, on some American airline that is being focusing on diversity quotas and things like that, because with the demographic changing, the intentional demographic changing of our countries, we're also seeing this push to hire and put into positions of authority and high status these new arrivals or these foreign peoples, the diversity. And so now when you have people coming from countries that never really got to even second world status, and now they're in our countries, and by edict from the government or by hiring practices established in some big company, now they're being hired and they're being placed into positions with a great deal of responsibility. People's lives are at stake in some of these jobs. It's I just think there's no separating the immigration issue from the competency crisis. What do you think about that?
Well, yeah, I mean, I made there's a I mean, the last three videos that I did for YouTube, now it's kind of like a trilogy. I think I'll leave it at that. And so I think when you like it's fine. Like I'm gonna start and read more fiction, and I may like write about it or something like that. But I think what's interesting is the first video that I did, where I was talking about the power and its clients. So what I did there is that I leaned heavily on Bertrand de Juvenel, and then I was like, well, okay, so here on the one hand is like a philosopher, a thinker that it's interesting to read, and then if you apply that to the situation at hand, in this case, the way the sort of the top uses the bottom against the middle, then what you're doing is bringing that back home. And all of a sudden, like you can kind of say, well, so when we look at something like grooming gangs, you can actually look at the mechanisms of this, and you can from a different angle and from a different frame. And I think it brings it into more like it makes it more kind of understandable. It's disgusting still, but you can kind of think, right, so the policies that we see are deliberately designed by the elite, creating clients at the bottom to use against the middle, and that's exactly what we see. That's what they're doing. and I think that's good to do, and so in that way, it's a kind of that's what should be done, and that's so that was the first video that I did, and then on the second video there was a really long article, an excellent article at Palladium magazine, I believe, where it was about the just straightforward competency crisis, and I basically went through his article, which I wouldn't normally do, but I thought it was worth it just to highlight it, talking about all of that and about how these policies are locked in. Because if you so the problem is that they're putting people into positions of power which shouldn't be there. But in order to undo all of that, like how, so why exactly are they doing it? How, what are the policies based on? Where they're coming from? And you realize, like, this in America in particular, but they're coming in everywhere. In Britain, it's just the Equalities Act instead of civil rights. But what's going to happen is that if you try and undo that, that would be the like a far right act, and the territory that takes you into is where, well, that is evil. Then that would be classed as far right, fascist, Nazi kind of thing, because then you're talking about just banning all of the equality stuff, all of the diversity hiring. You would have to rip out all of that law, all of that legislation, because it's one thing to say we shouldn't be doing this anymore, but then to actually get that into law and legislation, then you're talking about tearing out a lot of civil rights legislation, or just abolishing the Equalities Act in Britain, for example, and that would be seen as radical and far right, which nobody in power would do. If that, whether or not, like, the ramifications of that would probably take us further afield. And so what you're going to end up with is where increasingly, I mean, that Robertson points out that in America, you get all of these train crashes now, which didn't used to happen so much.
Hmm.
They've always had a few. There's always been train crashes, particularly in
Hmm.
America, because they've got so much rail lines. It's going to happen. You're talking about, I don't know, how millions of miles of train track. So, there's going to be a rock, there's going to be a dead bear on the track or something. It's
Hmm.
going to happen just because of how much there is. But um, in a kind of progressive society, that the idea would be that would be getting reduced over time. So over time, things would be getting safer.
Hmm.
You'd be making improvements. That's what progressivism's all about. And what you find is that actually things are getting gradually worse. And when you say, well, okay, why are they getting worse? They're kind of, the institutions are kind of coy about it.
Well, there's
Um,
one, sorry to interrupt, there's one example in America that's even a bit more stark than rail travel or freight transport, and that is in the airline industry. And I believe this was also mentioned in the article that you read, but um, not just one, several pilots, air traffic controllers have come out sort of privately, I suppose, in a way, like in discussions in the industry, in forums, in private meetings within the industry, and they have raised concerns about the effect that diversity quotas are having on the safety of air travel. And in that article that you analyzed, the author lists several examples of how near misses at
yeah.
airports have increased by a huge
The,
percentage. No, go ahead.
the reason for that is that an air traffic controller is, many of the jobs and many of the sort of the more lucrative jobs and careers, you do actually have to have college degrees and whatnot. You actually have to have evidence of higher education for that. Now, okay, so that's where you get into affirmative action. The same thing is happening there. But on the amazingly, air traffic controllers, it means that if you are very good at maths, for example, and you've got good cognitive abilities and you're quick-witted, you don't actually need to have a college degree. So what that results in is that uh, in it, it's actually the air traffic controllers as a job which is easily filled with diversity hires because they don't have to even take into account the university graduations or anything like that. So there's certain area just because of the way the incentive structure works and the way the system works. There's going to be certain sensitive areas where you're going to see more diversity hiring go on than you might expect. And because of the sort of the mentality of the system, because of its ethical code and its psychology, you can't point out that actually this person here, from Chicago, who's now guiding like jumbo jets into land, like he may not be the best person for the job, but he's ticked the right box, so he is.
I read something on it. It was one of those screen grabs, screenshots from maybe it was a Reddit forum or something, but it was literally that. It was a female, I believe, employee of an airline, and she said, "I give up. I quit my job of 10 years um, because I cannot stand this anymore. The diversity hires are it's gone too far." And she specifically tells the story of someone named Jamal who is clearly not cut out for the job, and hasn't received the training or the education. He's just been given this position because of diversity quotas, and she has become so frustrated working alongside people like Jamal and having to swoop in and fix his mistakes, and which can be very dangerous and have disastrous consequences. His mistakes, that she's become so flustered and frustrated that she says that I'm throwing in the towel. I can't do this anymore.
I mean, I did an article which was also touching on Robert's article. I did the video of the competency crisis where I just went through the whole article. But there was a funny thing that happened because the week that that article came out and I was reading it was the week that the Titan submarine went down. And I actually think that, well, what happened was it was a private sort of multi-millionaire, maybe a billionaire, and he designed his own submarine. And when he wanted to get through the law, like the legislation, the rules, the safety rules and stuff in the deep sea kind of community, like that was an interesting thing in itself that I touched on. And the article that I wrote was called "Too Heavy for Superman." And what was interesting about it was that as a way to get around the rules, and he said that he was sick of being lectured to by middle-aged, like boring white men in their 50s, because when you get into the world of submersibles and like deep sea exploration, it's actually relatively untouched by diversity and by sort of political correctness or woke, as they would say today. It's like a sort of it's a little pocket where boring white men in their 50s, often who've been in the navy or something like that, like they still rule, and that's because it's not really a sort of strategic part of the American empire. So it's a kind of outpost which has been forgotten about. So they still rule. It's still boring white men in their 50s who set the rules. And this fella with his submarine, he wasn't actually a libtard himself, but what he did was invoke the language of diversity and the language of the left to say, I'm going to get around this. I'm not going to be lectured to by these boring white men in their 50s. I'm going to take on like a new dynamic staff to and all of this
Yeah.
kind of thing.
Like
And
saying the right buzzwords is a way to justify what,
yeah,
cutting corners or, whatever you want to do. If you just say, no, I'm doing it because I want to,
there's
increase
yeah,
the participation of marginalized peoples or something, even though that's not really the intent, we can
yeah.
get away with it nowadays.
he wanted to go down there. He wanted to go down to the Titanic, and he wasn't really too bothered about the safety. Well, as he said, it was as if that industry, if you could call it that, was too conservative, too stuck in
Hmm.
its ways. And he went down there, and his rumor was his safety officer was female. And you had this kind of photo that went round where all of like
Hmm.
his engineers were like women and stuff.
Hmm.
Now people have disputed that after the fact, because I kept watching the videos um, after the news cycle ended. People are still talking about it because I thought it was very interesting. But the reason I called it Too Heavy for Superman was that it was a kind of a riff of a Flaming Lips song, and in that, um, the Flaming Lips sing the song, and it's that Superman, all of humanity are crying out for Superman to show up and save the day, but he's just not coming because this time it's too heavy. This time Superman,
Hmm.
he's just had it. He just can't lift the load this time. This time he just can't come and save the day. And there was an element of that when that submarine went down, and the reaction of people was kind of like all of a sudden people wanted the expertise of boring white men in
Hmm.
their 50s.
Hmm.
And I was like, you have to understand that when you've avoided all of the safety regulations, and now you've gone down, it turned out it imploded pretty much straight away. They would have been pulped instantly. But for a while, there was this idea that they were kind of sitting down on the bottom of the sea, like 3 miles down, looking at the Titanic. And there was this expectation that sort of these boring 50-year-old white men will be able to conjure up some sort of crane or some kind of way to lift them off the bottom and bring them back up, and it'll all end happily ever after. And that's not the case, I'm afraid, because what you're talking about, what was undermined there, was all of these protocols and all of these, as Robertson said in his article, complex systems within complex systems, and the expertise of the 50-year-old nightman has kind of created, in a way, a world in the West where people just assume that it will carry ticking over. They assume that if you're 3 miles down on the bottom of the sea, that there's going to be some magical crane which can lift you off the bottom, or they can there's some way to do it, and it's kind of infantilized people, but also that kind of assurance has allowed people to get silly ideas that you can begin messing around with the core elements which created this complex system in the first place. And the core elements are what Robertson would call the social capital, which is just white men. So you begin pulling the blocks. It's like Jenga, where you begin pulling the blocks out from the bottom and not the top, and that you can expect much bigger things to go down than that little submersible thing that he built.
It's a haunting idea, um, and it's also, of course, what they are doing to the very nation, all over Europe and in the United States and in Australia and Canada. Just taking out pieces of the nation and then inserting some invasive species, basically, and we're just expected to hope for the best or assume that everything is the same. We're all just interchangeable cogs in a consumerist machine. Um, so, if the age of immigration, which we've been living in, and men like William Hague say is only going to continue and indeed expand and increase into this, ever bigger leviathan, where we have now, as he put it, even if just I think what did he say? Even if just 2% of the projected people in the global south move up into Europe, that would be 140 million people or something like that. If that leads into, whether indirectly or I would argue quite directly, into the competency crisis, the competency crisis then leads directly into what we've seen, not just in Britain, throughout the Anglosphere, and then some other countries too, like Germany comes to mind. But that leads directly into the absolute state of policing. And there was a recent example out of Britain which just brought this matter into our collective conscience again. In West Yorkshire, a 16-year-old autistic girl was manhandled, basically, arrested and put into, I think, 20 hours of custody because she said that a female police officer, and apparently she was also a bit inebriated at the time that she said this, but she said that a female police officer that caught her glance as she was outside drinking in the park or something looked like a lesbian like her nan. And the West Yorkshire police, or this particular female police officer who looks like a lesbian, took that as a hate crime. And now these hate crimes and these hate speech laws, I think, are a direct result of the age of immigration, because the influx of all these different peoples into our countries and the creation and forced imposition of these multicultural, multiracial societies has resulted in our antagonistic and malevolent ruling class to devising all of these different kinds of laws and penalties and punishments and protected classes that wouldn't have existed in our previous homogeneous nations. And then it also ties into the competency crisis, because as we saw with this 16-year-old girl being arrested in England, the police officers were completely incompetent, and they were first and foremost ideologically possessed and motivated by ideology. They had no idea how to keep the situation calm, how to deal with a 16-year-old autistic girl. At one point, a male officer is told by the girl's mother, she's autistic. And he responds, I don't care. that's incompetency right there. And then we see this all over the Anglosphere. A man in the United States, an Asian American, was put into custody for reading Bible verses on a street corner. Just recently, a 75-year-old, very obese elderly man in Utah was shot dead by the FBI for basically boomer Facebook memes that he had been posting. Australia, we saw become very authoritarian and heavy-handed during the years of COVID and now into the present. And then in Canada, I believe another man was pushed around by the police and then arrested, again, on these sort of hate crimes or hate speech laws that are designed to protect special groups because he tried to protest a drag queen story time. We're seeing this in Ireland. Just as Ireland is being demographically transformed in real time in front of our eyes, in what it can only be described as sort of a plantation 2.0, well, right alongside that, what has the Irish government begun doing? Trying to pass a new hate crimes bill, a hate speech law, which is on hold for now because enough independent journalists and activists and nationalists and just the people in general in Ireland have protested sufficiently to put this on hold and voiced enough displeasure. But the two dovetail immaculately, perfectly. The more diverse Ireland has become, and the more that Ireland has promoted open celebration of all types of sexual, let's just say, oddities. At the same time now, the Irish state has to impose new laws to protect these groups of people and to prevent the native Irish from voicing any sort of complaint or dissent or criticism. So they all go hand in hand. Now, you just made some more videos about this, and I think it was also another Substack about the event in West Yorkshire. So what are your thoughts on what happened there?
I mean, it's funny because I just mentioned before, like Jenga and the society, the multicultural society that they've created. It's as if they've built a tower and there's only like one block in the middle at the bottom, and it's forever. It always needs to be propped up with more lies and more gagging, more censorship. And if you look at what happened in West Yorkshire, the thing that jumped out at me was that the actual blonde woman. I mean, I don't know if she's lesbian or not, but it was clear to me that like she was in a kind of dominant role. There was a black woman there, and then there was like five white men, but burly kind of cops that you might expect. And I thought it's weird because it's that even the black woman was just kind of getting on with the job because she would have been classed as a obviously she's probably diversity hire as well, but in this particular instance it was that kind of tomboyish policewoman who seemed to be in the dominant role. She seemed to be calling the shots, and because of the warped logic of diversity hiring, of protecting people who are the least likely to be good at the job, she then probably finds herself in the minds of the men that she's actually the one that they have to informally probably like bend the knee to because
Hmm.
her and the black woman will be protected and they won't. And so what you then created is a situation where the woman who is the person who is least competent and least capable to do the job is a kind of informal leader. I
Hmm.
mean, if you look at if you look at two of those cops, the white male cops, I have no doubt that let's say I like just with my build, I'm kind of a bit burly. I'm not particularly a hard case or anything. I've been around a bit, but that's it. I don't present myself as being any. I'm just a normal fella from the north, really. But I would say, and if I was a bit of a nut job, and I was drunk or whatever, yeah, two of those would, and I wanted to put up a fight. That the two male cops would still be able to sort of manhandle me down, put me into the back, probably one at a push, whatever. But I was looking at that woman and I was thinking she just couldn't do anything. And that's just me. This is not to mention like immigrants from
Right.
Nigeria,
And we've seen that
20,
multiple
20,
times.
22-year-olds from
Yeah.
Somalia. And
I'm
so
sure you've seen the dozens of videos, maybe even hundreds
it's
of
yes.
mobile phone camera footage of, some migrant variety just completely getting away with all sorts because the female police officers can't apprehend him. And this happens in Britain, this happens in Germany, Sweden. These poor female police officers aren't. It turns out that there are differences in upper body strength and speed, and it turns out that these often rather pudgy female police officers can't quite cope with very desperate and aggressive Pakistani or Nigerian, and that just puts everyone else at danger.
I mean, if you looked at her build, if you look the photo, I mean, I got a couple of sort of big hits on Twitter on this the last few days. And one of them, if you look at her photo where she's standing there with her arms folded, like her arms are like twigs. Like it's she's just got no power
Hmm.
whatsoever in a physical sense.
Hmm.
She's absolutely powerless. So if you take if you look at somebody like a big black fella from London, you don't even have to bring in guns because there's a different problem with this in America, where in order to make up for their lack of physical strength, you'll find that the female cops will pull out the gun and just shoot people because
And you have to be careful because there was that case of the female police officer. This was so bad. I don't know if you remember this, but there's this body cam footage of a female police officer who's pulled over, unfortunately, a black man. And I say unfortunately because I think this happened during the summer of George. So it's like another example that just made people chimp out again. But she says, the black man is resisting arrest. He's not complying, and she's powerless. But in the United States, she has tools that she can use that British police officers don't have. And so she says, I'm going to tase you. And then she says, taser, taser, like, here comes the taser. But instead, she pulls out her actual sidearm pistol and shoots him with live rounds. And it was just, oh man, that was such a another low for diverse
I,
police forces.
I don't know how many of if it was just like if you could clone that blonde female cop in Yorkshire. I don't know. I would say maybe take 4 or 5 of them to take me in. I just find them useless.
Mhm.
They're not intimidating. They haven't got the power that it takes.
And what's really interesting
And
too is that if you're going to say that female police officers have a place, that we in the luxurious first world where we can have these luxuries, we can have these indulgences like female police officers. One of the justifications, I suppose, would be you could expect female police officers to have more empathy and be better at, you know, keeping a situation from escalating via
yes,
the power of their empathy, especially when it comes to delinquent children. In this
yeah,
case, a delinquent girl. You'd think that the female police officer would be rather useful in that situation. Okay, be empathetic with this teenage girl who's had a bit too much to drink. Maybe she's nervous around men, or men are intimidating. So we're going to bring in a female police officer to deal with the situation. But it actually turns out that in clown world, in the rainbow dictatorship, we actually have the bitterness of the female coming up to full display, and the ankle biting and the petty tyrant, which was completely on display with this incident in England.
yeah. It used to be like that. It did. If you went, there was a old show. I was thinking about this. But there was an old cop show in Britain called The Bill. And in the bill there would be if there was a woman, what would happen would be a girl would be raped, and they'd bring in like there would be a female officer, but this would be her thing. They'd call her in, and then she'd come in to talk to the girl, and she would like say to all the men, "Get out." And then it would be it was like, okay, this is you just get out and leave. I'm here to deal with this, and there's a touch of feminism in there, but all
Mm-hmm.
right, I can kind of get it. I can kind of get that it's a thing that the females, all right, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But now what's happened is that, yeah, as I say, it's the complete opposite. And another thing that I touched on in the video was that if you imagine going a little bit further back when you actually had the Bobby on the beat, like because political correctness didn't really exist, basically the patriarchy wouldn't have cared very much what a drunken 16-year-old girl had to say.
Yes.
the,
Mm-hmm.
the 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 patriarchy would have addressed the mother and said, like, why is your daughter drunk out on the streets at this hour of
Exactly.
the night? And
Mm-hmm.
if the daughter was like sitting in the corner shouting and mom like waffling on, what he wouldn't have even cared what she was saying. It would have just been ignored, and you would have just ignored the girl because she's a drunken 16-year-old. You can't expect, and if she insulted the policeman, he would have probably just brushed it off because it's just an idiot girl. But
Yeah.
it's now in where everything is kind of hysterical and
Mm-hmm.
politicized, that this becomes like an ideological infringement, and she has to get hauled down the station and pinned down on the floor by all the goons.
It strikes me as well, the obviously the racial makeup of the girl and her family. These were white
Yeah,
English people, and the thought came to me that I just wonder, throughout England, Britain in general, on a daily basis during the week, how many snarky comments do you think female police officers receive from the mouths of Britain's diverse populations, Britain's Muslim populations, who don't have the same view of women in authority positions that we in the West have been conditioned to accept? And yet, I just think, and I'm sure you would agree, that we would never see a case of 7 police officers seemingly operating at the behest of an offended female, um, apprehending cheeky Indian boys, or Africans in London, Mizzy types. But I don't believe for a second that those types haven't ever said something um, towards a female police officer. And in this case, all the white English girls said was, "This, she looks like a lesbian, like my nan." I just think, I don't know
Well,
if you
well,
have any thoughts on
well,
that.
just look at the difference. Mizzy was breaking into people's houses. He was walking with his phone and uploading videos on TikTok where he was walking into people's houses in quite affluent parts of London.
Mm-hmm.
And then there was like a family standing there cooking their dinner, and he was like walking around in their house,
Mm-hmm.
pretending that he was in the wrong place. Everybody knew it was a lie. And then there was another one where there was a couple of girls at a
Mm-hmm.
train
Yeah.
station, and
Yep.
he was like, he was saying, "Do you want to die?"
Yeah.
Literally approaching a woman on late at night on a train station and saying,
Stroking
"Do
her
you want?"
hair.
Touching her, "Do you
Yeah.
want to die?" And then uploading the video to TikTok.
Yeah.
He didn't get the treatment that the white girl got for saying, not even to the police woman, by the
Yeah.
way, to her
Yeah.
mother. In a comment to her mother, she said, "It looks like my lesbian nana."
Yeah.
So in Britain, in the way that the hate speech law works, I mean, it turned so the girl didn't. You can say, okay, this is politically correct craziness in England, but even by that standard, she didn't actually commit any crime, because the hate speech has to be directed toward the individual, for one, and then it you can't. What they got off for was actually a public order offence, but she wasn't in
Mm-hmm.
public. She was sitting at home
Mm-hmm.
under
Yeah.
under a staircase or something.
Mm-hmm.
So what's happened is there's been a backlash. By the way, if the mother didn't get all of this on video, we wouldn't know anything about it. There wouldn't The
It's
girl
true.
would have just, so there wouldn't have been a backlash. And so now what's happened is that the Yorkshire police have came out and sort of backed off. They've dropped it all, and
Did you
they're
see?
trying to run off from it.
Did you see who is the spokesperson that's taking the fall, or at least put out the statement?
Was it Oz Khan or something?
Oz Khan.
Yeah,
Yeah, the
yeah.
assistant constable is a fella named Oz Khan, which again, I just brings this. It's this never ending loop of the age of immigration, brings about this competency crisis, brings about these goonish police who are, floundering with just basic police activity, public order, and it's all being infused with politics and ideology, and it's just like this vicious, never-ending, very tiresome loop that we're all living in. But yeah, I thought it was very very revealing that the
And
assistant constable is Oz Khan.
I mean, this kind of touches on what I call the great turning away, which was, I mean, like it does raise the question of how much more of this people can tolerate, how much more, and I don't mean in terms of some kind of backlash, but because it plays into a wider sort of zeitgeist of the attention economy online and the news story of the day, the daily outrage on Twitter, everybody swims. It's like a sort of a bait ball frenzy on certain stories like this, which I played my role in, as it happens, on the West Yorkshire thing. And things only ever seem to be getting gradually worse. And the real kind of horror of William Hague's article was that he what he was saying was like, this is just beginning. This is like, if you're
Yes.
tired of this, if you're tired of this now, if you're
Hmm.
sick of this now, that then it's
It's
only
so
just begun.
dystopian. It's
It's
so
it's
dystopian.
it's horrific. And by the way, one of the things he did touch on there in that article is he's sort of laying out how it could be done, and he's saying, in addition, for any government, the introduction of a digital identity system should be part of clarifying the right of an individual to live and work here. So he has what you were saying, like it all leads back to the immigration problem.
Hmm.
So now this is going to be used to bring that in. But at the end of the day, it's I can the problem that we've got is um what because what we began the conversation was talking about is that they're not going to change, and if you
Hmm.
try and organize a political party, like it's as if everything's been done and nothing changes. Every way we've tried to take on the system is like it always fails, and it's reaching a point where they will just ban your political party, or that there's gradually more that you'll get debunked. You'll get roughed up by coppers or whatever it happens to be. They will just shut you down, and so it's what people would say would be like, I can't just live in this kind of impotent frenzy of anger all of the time.
Hmm.
And I want to, if you then just accept that it's all going to hell, we've done our best to stop it. But it is what it is. The problem, particularly in a place like England, is that, well, where are you going to go?
Hmm.
Because the policies are, it's like it's not as easy to just walk off as what you might think. And I think
Yeah.
in a way the gardening is a complete change of frame and a complete change of it is, if they say, I'm just going to wait it out. Um, obviously, I'm still in the game. I mean, since I did that article, I've obviously I'm making stuff about what's happening in Yorkshire and everything, because I kind of what the thing that gets me is that I find it immoral to do nothing. It goes back to the immigration thing, where some people will say that is low status, but horrible, evil things are happening. Like I still write and talk about the grooming gang situation,
Yeah.
which many people would think is like done and dusted. Oh, it's like many news cycles ago, and you don't hear about it much for these days. Even though, I mean, it'll still be going on.
Exactly.
Um, the problem that I have is that I feel it is you have like a moral duty to say, I'm not going to I'm not going to stop mentioning this because it's no longer in the news cycle, or because it's kind of there's this new topic to talk about.
Hmm.
And I think that's the tendency of the attention economy on the internet, is where
Absolutely.
the new is always sort of the novel is always more alluring than something which everybody kind of knows about. And this is why when you saw the book where you can read, say, Burton de Juvenal on power, and then you go back and you think, well, let's talk about the grooming gangs again. Well, let's look at it from a different perspective. This time, we're going to have a look at the dynamics of power and how they made that happen. And it fits perfectly.
Absolutely well said. There is a moral factor here, and I'm sure you've had this leveled your way. I've had it as well, where you will draw attention to something that's happened, a migrant act of unspeakable cruelty and violence, or some delinquent behavior, and there might be one or two people who say, "Yeah, we already know this is happening. What's the point?" Um, but I believe, just as you said, that I would still be drawing attention to this stuff, even if it was, new or old hat, passe or novel. Like, these are serious things that are affecting not just our nations, our institutions, but also ourselves as individuals, and our personal psyche and our well-being, to the point that we have people who are looking for just a bit of momentary tranquility and solace in a vegetable garden, because this technocratic metaverse world is is becoming so dystopian and frustrating, and nothing seems to be getting better, that all we can do is turn away from it. I'm reminded again of things that happen in Italy, and I'll see all these things that happen in Italy, all this delinquency. It's happening in Italy as well, ever more. And someone like Matteo Salvini will share it on one of his social media accounts, and he'll put some caption saying, enough is enough, or we need to clean out the Italian streets and make them safe for families, etc., etc. And what I've noticed increasingly is responses to him that all kind of repeat the same refrain, which is, Salvini, we voted for you to do what you're saying, to put a stop to this. We know this is happening. We've been living with this now for well over a decade. It hasn't gotten better. It's actually got worse. And we voted for you to do something about it. Do something then. Like, don't just raise
Yeah,
awareness on your Instagram and type in some meaningless caption. You are in a position of authority. We voted for you en masse to do something about it.
the Tories do the same. You'll get somebody in the Tory party like Suella Braverman, who's the Home Secretary, and she's always going on about the small boats. We used to call them like illegal immigrants, or going further back, it would be illegal aliens, and then they softened it to like asylum seekers or illegal immigrants.
Oh yeah, the linguistic
And
playing
then
around has been very damaging as well.
it became refugees, and
Mm-hmm.
now in England they just call them small boats. So
Yeah.
it sounds like something off Thomas the Tank Engine, and they've made it as gentle sounding as they possibly can, and you get these Tories. They'll go to conferences. There was one called the New Conservatives, and they also go on GB News, and it's like, oh, this is unacceptable. The levels of immigration, or they're lowering wages, and they're all, we're housing, we're spending 500 million a day on putting immigrants up in hotels, blah, blah, blah. And it's weird because they sound like us. They sound like people who are pissed off, out on the fringes, making videos or writing an article on Substack or whatever. And this is the government.
Mm-hmm.
Like
if only they had some power to do something.
If only you were in power. Like, you're
for 13
running
years
the country
as well.
You're running the country.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, I'm so sick and tired of the woke left. The woke left have got out of it. Well,
Yeah,
do something
yeah.
about it. Bang some heads together. Change some laws. You're the government.
Yeah, yeah. Well, you can stick around until half past the hour, so that's about 15 more minutes. So I'm going to check in on the questions and comments. Over on Entropy, we have a donation from Anon732. He says, keep up the good work, guys. And he has donated $235. So thank you very much. Again, to all our listeners, this operation is basically funded by your contributions and your donations. Without them, it wouldn't really exist. So do consider sending a donation our way via Odyssey or DLive or over on Entropy. We certainly appreciate it. It's what I said last week, speaking with American Krogan and Endeavor. We have grown up, especially if you're millennial or Zoomer, thinking that things come for free, but they don't actually. A lot of work goes into them. There's maintenance costs. So any bit helps, keeps this countercurrents thing going. Thank you very much, Anon 732, for that fantastic donation. Over on Odyssey, Gadius Maximus has donated $10 and he says, gents, what do you think about the Banania situation? Has doxing lost its power? I think by Banania he means Richard Hanania. I think that's how you say his name.
I'm less paranoid about being doxxed than what I used to be.
Yeah.
I probably will be kind of faced out there one day. But I think I don't know. That particular. I mean, first, I think it depends on the individual. I think what's interesting about that is it's not so much the docs itself. It's that there was like, you expect people to get cancelled because they used to write for Countercurrents or something, and it's not so much the case anymore. I think that's the interesting factor, which we've seen emerging. I think there was another case recently of that happening, and it was like,
Pedro Gonzalez over in America as well.
what?
But
Yeah,
but
yeah,
he cucked, and Hanania kind of cucked as well. Although Hanania just seems to me, uh, I remember one of your tweets a couple of weeks ago when it was still called Twitter, I guess, so we can still call it a tweet. But you said something in relation to Richard Hanania, and it was, I think you just quote tweeted
I,
one of his things, and you said, "Dear whoever runs the algorithm, I don't want to see any of this man's stuff. Okay, thank you, bye bye."
yeah, yeah. It was because if you're on Twitter, you just seem, and you're on
All
the
the
right,
time.
you just seem to get them shoved in your face.
Yeah, yeah,
I just ended up muting them or blocking them or something. I
exactly. I
just
did
didn't
as
want to
well.
see it anymore. I read the it's weird because on a Saturday morning, I tend to try and catch up with the sort of the right wing will be. There'll be some things going on, like some drama or what's everybody talking about,
Hmm.
and especially this week when I've been very busy, like doing my own content. I think, okay, I'll catch up on the Saturday. So today I read the mold bug Mencius Mencius courtesy of an article, his message to
Yeah,
Richard Hanania, which I actually quite enjoyed. And he kind of took him apart, and it was
yeah,
like, so that was mainly how I know of this story. The kind of it kind of skipped me by a little bit,
yeah.
and the reason I think there's a weird thing because there seems to be the people are less scared of the docs of being exposed for this kind of having these opinions than what they used to be. I think that may be true, but I don't really understand why it is because the repercussions have never been more severe. Because
Yeah,
now you're talking about getting debunked.
yeah.
Where in the old days, if you were if it was like the British, you would have your face plastered up on the Hope Not Hate website, and they'd be trying to
Hmm.
get you fired from your job and whatnot. And it could be that we're in this kind of transition where the kind of I think the left are sort of they've blown a lot of social capital just on being mad. So if the
Hmm.
people who are against you are loonies and everybody knows they're loonies, then their enemies seem a bit more sane. They've lost that ability to demonize people. You've got to go really extreme before that happens. I think it also one of the things that happened because of all of the censorship is that the right wing more generally became the old days of the Daily Storm and whatnot, that kind of went away. And people became a lot more strategic and a lot
Hmm.
sort of cleverer about how they put things, and just to survive on an algorithm or whatever. So when you've had a few years of that, um, I think people are then a bit more comfortable because they're thinking, well, I didn't say anything crazy, I'm in a situation where I kind of just say what I say. I would say these things in the real world, basically.
Right.
And I've reached a stage where I'm just a bit more clever with how I put things than I used to be, and I've been at that for so long that I'm not as scared as and I think that's not like that's a general trend, perhaps. But it is something, yeah.
Okay. Well, with the few minutes left that you'll be spending with us, here's one question specifically for you, Mr. Morgoth. It's from Ulrich Varange over on Odyssey. He's donated $5, and he asks, "What is Morgoth's view on the spate of recent mainstream books from Rufo, Hanania, Heather MacDonald, etc., challenging anti-white racism?" So, some of these people, like Hanania, particularly under his pseudonym, were doing some good and interesting work. So, what do you think about their their overall contribution?
I can't really say it because I don't pay any attention to them. If honest, I don't even know. I know that Chris Rufo. I thought he was an American politician. Is he?
I get him mixed up with there's him and then there's someone else. I can't remember which one has like a an Asian wife and multiracial kids. He goes after woke, but then he's also very much like pro miscegenation, and he doesn't really care about white people, obviously. So he draws the line there. I
I,
don't know if that's Rufo or if that's Lindsay. There's another guy named Lindsay.
yeah, Jim. Yeah, I know of that one. Yeah,
I
but
I, I can't keep them all straight. And then Hanania, I never really paid much attention to him. I'm kind of like you. I was annoyed seeing his stuff all the time on Twitter, so I muted
I
him.
I muted him because I never read his. I certainly never read any book that he wrote. I don't know about like what that book is or what he did about like sort of whites. Because what I saw, my impression when I saw the work that he was doing, what he was promoting on Twitter threads, which are just like I hate Twitter threads.
Mm-hmm.
Um, like it's this kind of statistical kind of
Mm-hmm.
this statistic in intellect, and it bores me, and I don't like it. And this is kind of like what Moldbug was kind of kind of taking him. Moldbug was roasting him for this because he came out and said that like the reason why he disavowed sort of white nationalism was because he was kind of he got properly red pilled by Steven Pinker. He decided that Steven Pinker's
Imagine.
arguments on race and whatnot were just irrefutable, and I'm now properly enlightened. You know, so I'm stepping back into the
Oh
mainstream.
God.
So if he's done other stuff, I don't know. I don't like him. I don't pay any attention to him, and the rest of them I don't even know who they are.
Heather
But
McDonald, I think, was a female who criticizes feminism, but if she's starting to dabble in taking on anti-white racism, that's interesting. I think I remember her from a few years back. She was sound, but I haven't paid much attention to her in recent times.
there's a certain kind of like public intellectual that I just don't like. I find that this kind of endless bandying around of statistics is kind of boring.
Yeah. There's one other donation here on Odyssey, another $5 from Soaker City, who writes, I can viscerally feel the tides turning. You, gentlemen, should be proud of all that you have done. God bless you from the heartland of Canada. Remember the convoys and support the Coots 4, our political prisoners. Yeah, I remember the convoys. I wrote a Substack about them on my own Substack. What's that now? 2 years ago, 2 Februarys ago, and I am glad to be reminded that that ordeal isn't quite over, and that there are in fact political prisoners in Canada from those days of the convoys. Yeah, I hope that they find the justice that they deserve. But just like the January 6th political prisoners in America, it doesn't look good for them. Okay, and then over on D Live, real quickly, we have one lemon donator who donated 1 lemon. Thank you very much. And Spartan40 Sardwalker donated 1 ice cream. Thank you very much. Okay, Mr. Morgoth, thank you for hanging out with me on this Saturday evening. You've got things to do, so I'm going to let you go. For those of you who are listening, I'll hang around for a few more minutes and just take some questions or comments, abuse and love, whichever you prefer, and then we'll wrap up in a few more minutes. But our guest does have to get going, so thank you very much again, Morgoth, for
all right. Thank you
tagging
very
along.
much, and I'll see you later, chat.
Yeah, great talking to you. Take care. Okay, so now it's just Pox Populi and the audience. So again, I'll take a look over on the chat, see if there's any more questions or comments. Mr.'s Lootbox says, I think the term anti-whiteism is itself anti-white. I'm sorry, anti-white racism is itself anti-white. Yeah, I mean, I don't really like anything that involves the word racism, to be honest, considering how racism has only been used against white people, and it's used to undercut white people and bludgeon them with original sin, basically. Um, so yeah, I would say just call it anti-whiteism, because there's really nothing wrong with what is considered to be racism, because the definition doesn't seem to be just blind hatred for people, for other people. It's prejudice plus power. It's in the case of when it's only ever directed at white people, it's a term that just refers to in-group preference, wanting to live amongst your own kind, wanting to live in the culture created by your ancestors. And so when it comes to that definition, there's nothing wrong with quote unquote racism, and everyone is quote unquote racist. So yeah, I also can agree that the term anti-white racism is a bit flat. It's a bit blunt. Okay, let's check over on DLive. Reed Johnson has linked over on DLive Greg Johnson's take on the Richard Hanania fiasco. It's very interesting to read what Greg Johnson wrote for Countercurrents. It goes back many years, all the way to I think 2009, when this guy Richard Hanania was writing under the pseudonym Richard Host. And one of the most important points that Greg Johnson makes is that it's not enough just to be clever or intelligent or have the best arguments, or like Morgoth was saying, be sort of a Rain Man type, a beautiful mind type, and analyze statistics. You have to have some courage as well. You have to have some morals, and you can have all the best arguments and all the best statistics on your side, but if you don't have any courage and if you don't have any morals, then it's all for naught. And Richard Hanania has displayed that he doesn't really have any courage. And he went on to say, or he expects us to believe, and there's something else that Greg Johnson pointed out. Hanania expects us to believe that all the things he said in the freedom of writing under a pseudonym, anonymously, that was trolling, that was insincere. But all the things that he's saying now that he's mainstream, now that he's a guest on Tucker Carlson, now that he's a public figure, and now that he's been doxxed, well, those are his sincere beliefs. And that's just absurd. It's obviously absurd to think that. But that is often the case. We see this happen a lot. And people still apologize. People still, we saw this with Pedro Gonzalez. There was an American baseball player who had a pretty milquetoast opinion on, I think it was men competing in female sporting leagues, but he apologized as well. It didn't do him any favors because he still got cut from the team. But this still happens. People get doxxed, or they suffer some sort of backlash, and then they have no courage. And then they apologize. Grief says, you do very good interviews, Pox Pop. You could do your own millennial type event, perhaps. Oh, I don't know about that. But thank you very much for the kind words. There was a comment here that I wanted to read. Yeah, here it is. Bok Choi, I believe that's maybe how you say his username. He writes, even if it was blind hatred, who cares? This is the definition of racism. Since when, I'll just read it as it's written. I think there's a bit of a typo there. Since when my preferences be legislated? Maybe there's a should missing. Since when should my preferences be legislated? How can a preference / opinion be illegal? It's like saying not liking broccoli is hate. Yeah, I pretty much agree with that too. I don't really care what the definition is. If it's you hate or whatever. There are certain times where hate is totally necessary, totally justified. I am not anti-hate, and that's one of the one of the diseases of our time is this obsession with hate. Everything is put within this framework of hate. So you see this all the time, that whenever we voice our objections, whenever we voice our vision, things that we're for, or the things that we are against, so very often the establishment response, the shitlib response, is to simply say that we're just hateful. We have hateful views. Well, I'm sorry. I don't care if you want to call them hateful or not. And there are some things that deserve my hatred. Over 1,000 European, specifically European women, German mostly women, raped and sexually assaulted in one night on New Year's Eve in Cologne, but throughout the country of Germany. I hate that. And I hate the people who did that. And if criticizing that is a hateful view, a hateful opinion, motivated by hate, well, I don't really care. I hate men, foreign men, who gather in huge groups and go around raping and sexually assaulting thousands of women in one bloody night. Another thing that we forget, talking about the grooming gangs and things like that, we forget sometimes all of these atrocities that have been done to us and our people. I never forget. I don't forget any of them. I have a grudge. I have a long memory. And I think these things matter. We shouldn't forget. And if our adversaries are going to harp on about things that happened in 1619 or 70 AD, well, then I'm certainly going to hold a grudge and remember things that happened in 2015, 2016. Bok Choi says, if hating a culture is not allowed, then am I not allowed to prefer a culture? I can't stand Pakistani culture, but I love Japanese culture. Is it racist to love the Japanese and not like Pakistanis? Don't care. Japanese are better than Pakistanis. Yeah, I don't find much to disagree with that. I don't have any problem with making value-based claims. Just ask, where would you rather live, in Pakistan or Japan? Most people are going to choose Japan for a reason. They just aren't brave enough to be explicit about it. Here on Odyssey, their username is quite long. All political expressiveness is flatulence, and then I can't read anymore. But he says, good things come to those who hate. Nice pun. Love a good pun. Over on DLive, Gaelic Nord writes, if whites don't racialize their sense of morality that excludes non-whites to be racially selfish, then not much will change in the future, in my opinion. Indeed. Well, that's the great struggle that we are fighting, is it not? Trying to make our kin, our friends and family, understand that it's okay to take our own side, that we don't have to live with perpetual guilt. The other day I saw this video, went viral. A black man in England is interviewing a white man on the street. And I can't remember if the question was, should the English be proud to be English, or are the English racist? It was one of those kinds of questions. And the Englishman says, he just spews out a whole lot of nonsense. But it's the kind of stuff that he's been indoctrinated into thinking. Well, the English have no culture. Basically, we're just a racist people who've accomplished nothing. All we've done is steal from other people. And chicken tikka masala is our national dish. What's that all about? Well, obviously, then our struggle is to get men like him to not think like that and take his own side and be proud who he is and what his nation has done, and have a positive vision for himself and his people in the future. That's pretty much all that we can do on, as far as meta politics is concerned. And of course, we don't have to convince everybody. We don't have to convince all of our friends and family. And at some point, it's not even worth it to try and convince a great mass of people. It's only worth it to reach out to those who are receptive, to those who would form a vanguard, a small percentage of a revolutionary vanguard. And when I say revolutionary, I mean in the true sense. This is another word, just like we were speaking there, Morgoth and I, about how they've changed the words from illegal alien to asylum seeker to refugee, and now just, small boat people. These linguistic tricks are very, very subversive, very sly, and much attention needs to be paid to them. But this word revolutionary is also another term that has been distorted and misused and now completely misunderstood. When we think of revolutions, they're usually, in the context of some leftist movement, Bolshevism, Antifa types, the civil rights movement in the United States, things like that, feminists. But they aren't revolutionary because there isn't a revolution. There isn't a revolution, a full turn, 360-degree rotation. That's a revolution. And this is something that Evola wrote about at great length. In order to be a true revolutionary, you need to go all the way back to tradition. What the leftists do, what the feminists do, the Marxists, the Bolsheviks, they only go halfway. They want to make a quote-unquote revolution which goes away from the current status quo, but then doesn't return to the origins, to the traditional origins of the status quo and revives them. It only goes halfway and then stops at the Bolshevik, feminist, or Marxist utopia, in their view. But it's not a revolution at all. A true revolution goes all the way back to tradition. And I think that is what we are trying to do. We are truly the revolutionaries. At least that's my understanding of the situation. If I had to, define it for myself, that, I would like a society and a nation that is, for example, not based on passport nationalism, that's not based on liberal democracy and all of the inherent decadence and degeneracy that comes from it. So what would be a full revolution? Well, going back to a more aristocratic society, I suppose, with hierarchy. Culturally speaking, I don't want a half-baked revolution. I want to return to the traditions that stem from Greco-Roman philosophy, classical art, our European traditions, those embers. And a full revolution would mean also not just going back and LARPing them, but reviving them and then creating a new form from them, one that is fit for our time and our place and our people. A question here on Odyssey from Bok Choi. He says, did you see that video of that country singer, Rich Men North of Richmond, Oliver Anthony? Guy lives on a farm and blew up online this week. Great singer. Yeah, I caught snippets of that song, and I've seen him all over the internet over the past few days. I haven't listened to this song entirely. I like twangy country music because I know where it comes from, and I love where it comes from. But it wasn't exactly my cup of tea, that song. But I understand that it has some very good lyrics. that it's kind of like a protest song for the disenfranchised white man in America and pretty much, all throughout uh, white countries. Um, I'll listen to it in full. I suppose I should, but yeah, I've seen everyone talking about it this week, definitely. And he's a great phenotype, you know, tall, ginger bearded. He's just a great. He's got a great look. Mike 7666 says Rolling Stone has already started attacking him. Oh God, about what? What? Ugh, man, they'll find anything to attack. Okay, well, we're coming up to an hour and 45 minutes, so I'll give a few more moments for questions or comments, and then I think we'll wrap it up for tonight. Greg Johnson will be back as the host next week to finish his lectures on the Gorgias, and then I will be back the week after with another special guest. I think you're really going to like who I've got lined up for that one. So let's see over on Entropy if there's any more questions over there. Don't think so. And on DLive, doesn't look like there's anything there. Okay, gang. Well, thanks for listening this evening. Thanks for tuning in. Oh, here's one more question. Bok Choy asks, Pox, is your family based? Is it easy/hard to talk to them about this stuff? Well, yes and no. I have some people in my family who really hate me because of views that I've expressed openly. And I have people in my family who I can, with whom I can talk about these things, no problem. And they pretty much agree. And in full truth, my Italian uncle helped red pill me many years ago when I first moved back to Italy, and we had been speaking, a lot through various, online communication, email, and things like that. But when I went to Italy and saw things with my own eyes, then I could see that he was actually, what he was telling me was true, and concerning and important. And so, yeah, I would say there definitely are people in my family who are the reason why I do what I do today. But then, yeah, on the other hand, there are some flesh and blood who are on the complete polar opposite. Okay. All right, guys. So that's it for tonight. Thanks again. Thanks to our moderators over on Odyssey and DLive for keeping everything running smoothly. Always appreciate your labors. And we will be back. Greg Johnson will be back next week, and then I'll be back the week after. So take care, everyone. Have a good night. Bye-bye.